The first time I realized my family could erase me without raising their voices was at a Christmas brunch I almost skipped. It was early, the kind of gray winter morning where the light feels unfinished. I remember standing in my apartment kitchen, coffee cooling in my hands, staring at a text from my mother that simply said, "Don't be late. We're finalizing things today." Finalizing what she didn't say. At that point in my life, I was 32, living alone in a rented townhouse outside Portland, working as a senior operations analyst for a regional logistics firm. I paid my own bills. I hadn't borrowed money from my parents in over a decade. On paper, I was independent. In reality, I was still orbiting a family gravity I didn't fully understand. My parents' house sat on a hill in Lakewood Heights, the kind of neighborhood with matching mailboxes and quiet rules no one ever had to explain. When I pulled into the driveway, my older sister Rebecca's SUV was already there, perfectly centered between the lines. She had always been good at arriving first. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and ham. The table was set with the good china, the one my mother only used when she wanted things to look permanent. My father Charles sat at the head reading something on his tablet with the same expression he used in board meetings. Calm, certain, unavailable. Rebecca looked up when I came in and smiled the way she always did, tight and polished like a reflex she'd practiced in a mirror. Her husband Daniel stood behind her, hand on her shoulder, already comfortable, already at home. "Good you're here," my mother said a little too brightly. "Sit, we'll start in a minute." That was the first sign. Christmas brunch doesn't usually start like a meeting. We ate quietly. Small talk skimmed the surface. Weather, traffic, a neighbor's new dog. I noticed there were no gifts under the tree, just empty space where something should have been. When the plates were cleared, my father folded his hands and looked directly at Rebecca. "We've decided to move forward," he said. "It's time." Rebecca nodded. "I think it's the right moment." I waited for someone to explain what they were talking about. No one did. My father finally turned to me, his eyes polite, distant. "Your mother and I updated the trust." There it was, a sentence dropped carefully like it had been rehearsed. "I see," I said. I kept my voice neutral. "Updated how?" Rebecca inhaled, then exhaled like this was the part she had been dreading. "It's mostly administrative," she said, "but it makes sense for continuity, for the business." The business. My parents owned a small but valuable distribution company my grandfather had started decades earlier. I had worked summers there in college. Rebecca had been groomed for it since high school. And I asked? My mother reached for my hand, then hesitated, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed. "Sweetheart, this isn't personal." That was the second sign. My father spoke instead. "We're placing controlling interest with Rebecca. The house the company shares the investment accounts. It simplifies things." "And me?" I asked. A pause, a coordinated one. "You'll still be provided for," Rebecca said quickly. "There's a provision." "A provision," I repeated. My father nodded. "A fixed distribution upon certain conditions." The words felt legal, heavy. I had spent years reading contracts for a living. I knew what vague language was designed to do. "What conditions?" I asked. Rebecca looked down at the table. My mother squeezed her napkin. "Marriage," my father said, "or children, traditional markers of stability." I let that sit between us. I wasn't married. I didn't have children. Not because I couldn't, but because I had chosen not to rush my life to make other people comfortable. "So until then," I asked. "It's held," he said, "in trust." "Who controls it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Rebecca didn't look up this time. "I do." The room was very quiet. Not tense, controlled. Like they had all agreed on the temperature beforehand. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not hurt, but recognition. This hadn't just happened. This had been building for years. The forgotten birthdays, the way my achievements were acknowledged with nods while Rebecca's were celebrated with speeches. The subtle redirection every time I asked about the company's future. I smiled. It surprised them. "Okay," I said. My mother looked relieved. Rebecca blinked, confused. "That's it?" Rebecca asked. "For now," I said. I stood, picked up my coat. "I assume the paperwork is already signed." My father hesitated. "We're meeting the attorney next week. Then I'll review it when it's official," I said. "Send me a copy." Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it. My mother watched me like she was waiting for a scene that never came. I left without another word. Outside, the air was sharp, clean. I sat in my car and let my hands rest on the steering wheel until they stopped trembling. Not because I was devastated, because something I had believed my entire life had just been quietly disproven. They hadn't excluded me in anger, they had excluded me calmly, rationally, with love, they would say. That was the moment I understood the difference between belonging and being tolerated. I drove home slowly, thinking about the way my father had said stability like it was a weapon, thinking about how trust documents could be changed, how silence could be strategic. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I wasn't sad. I was alert. And somewhere beneath that alertness was a single clear thought I couldn't shake. If they could make a decision like this without me, they could make many more. And next time, I would be ready. The copy of the trust arrived 3 days later in a cream-colored envelope with my father's return address printed in careful block letters. No note, no explanation, just paper. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the counter while I made dinner, while I washed a single plate, while the kettle screamed itself hoarse. I already knew what it would say in spirit. I wanted to know what it said in detail. When I finally sat down, I read it the way I read contracts at work. Slowly, without emotion, pen in hand. It was cleaner than I expected, professionally done, no obvious malice. That was the part that stung the most. I was not being punished, I was being managed. My name appeared fewer times than I thought it would. When it did, it was in careful conditional language. Discretionary distributions. At the trustee's judgment, subject to life circumstances. Rebecca named repeatedly as successor controller executor. I was not disinherited. That was important. It meant they could still tell themselves they were fair. But I was effectively sidelined. By page 14, I stopped reading and stared at the wall. The room felt smaller, as if the air had been rearranged without asking me first. This wasn't just about money, it was about permission, about who was trusted to decide what counted as a life. My phone buzzed. Rebecca. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text. We need to talk. You left so abruptly. I typed, then erased. Typed again. I'm reviewing the documents. I'll follow up in writing. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. You're overreacting. That was familiar. The way discomfort was always framed as drama when it belonged to me. I put the phone face down and went to bed. Over the next week, the pattern repeated. My mother called in the afternoons, voice soft, asking if I was eating enough, sleeping enough. Asking nothing about the trust, as if ignoring it might shrink it back into something harmless. My father sent one email. We trust you'll understand our reasoning. Reasoning. As if logic had been the missing ingredient in my life. At work, I was asked to step into a temporary role overseeing a new regional rollout. It came with longer hours and a quiet bump in authority. No announcement. Just responsibility handed over because someone needed the job done. It struck me how different that felt. No ceremony, no conditions, just trust. One evening, a colleague named Marissa stayed late with me. She was older, mid-40s, sharp-eyed kind, without being sentimental. We were reviewing shipment discrepancies when she glanced at my phone lighting up again and again on the desk. Family, she asked. Yes, I said. She nodded. They always think urgency belongs to them. I looked at her. Does it stop? She considered. Only when you let it. That stayed with me. The next Saturday, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. Not to argue, to observe. Rebecca's car was there again, of course. Inside, nothing had changed. Same furniture. Same framed photos, mostly of her. Her graduation. Her wedding. Her standing next to my father at the warehouse groundbreaking. There was one of me tucked into the hallway, small, easy to miss. They were in the living room when I walked in. Papers spread across the coffee table. Legal folders. No one jumped. They had expected me eventually. Hello, I said. My mother stood. You should have called. I know, I said. I didn't want to. Rebecca closed a folder. We're just finalizing some things. I'm sure, I said. I sat across from them. I had a question. My father leaned back. Go ahead. The conditions, I said. Who proposed them? Silence. Rebecca looked at my mother. My mother looked at her hands. My father cleared his throat. It was a mutual decision. Meaning, I asked. Rebecca sighed. Dad worries you're unattached, that you don't have anchors. I smiled faintly. And you do. I have a family, she said. So do I said. It just doesn't look like yours. My father's jaw tightened. This isn't about lifestyle, it's about legacy. There it was again. That word. Heavy. Convenient. I've worked since I was 16, I said. I've never asked you for money. I've built a career you don't bother to understand. What exactly am I missing? My mother finally looked up. We just want you protected. By putting me under my sister's control, I said. Rebecca bristled. That's not fair. Is it inaccurate? I asked. No one answered. I stood. I'll have my attorney review this. My father's eyes sharpened. Attorney? Yes, I said, mine. My mother gasped softly like I'd sworn. Rebecca's voice cooled. That won't be necessary. It is, I said. For me. I left again. This time I didn't feel the need to steady my hands. 2 days later, I met with an estate attorney recommended by a colleague. A woman named Judith with silver hair and a voice that never rose. She read the trust quietly, then slid it back to me. You're not powerless, she said, but you are vulnerable. I nodded. What can I do? That depends, she said. Do you want inclusion or do you want independence? I thought about my father's certainty, Rebecca's practiced smile, my mother's quiet compliance. I want control over my own life, I said. Judith nodded. Then the first step is boundaries. The second is documentation. And the third, she paused, is being prepared for pushback. I smiled. I'm good at preparation. That night, I went home and pulled out every financial document I had. Statements, old emails, notes from conversations I had never thought to question. Patterns emerged when you stopped pretending they were accidents. There were transfers I didn't remember agreeing to. Accounts opened in my name when I was younger. Small things, legal, quiet, useful. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Because I wasn't trying to be understood anymore. I was getting ready to act. Once you stop trying to be loved, patterns become easier to see. The first pattern was money. Not the dramatic kind people argue about at dinner tables, but the quiet kind that moves without witnesses. Automatic, polite, designed to be forgotten. I spent a full Sunday at my dining table with folders spread out like a second career. Bank statements, old tax returns, email threads going back years. Things I had signed when I was younger because my father said, it's just administrative, or my mother said, this will make things easier later. Later had arrived. There were accounts opened when I was 22, right after college, when I was still using my parents' address for mail. A brokerage account I didn't actively manage. A life insurance policy where Rebecca was listed as a contingent decision maker. A power of attorney document drafted during a so-called routine planning phase, signed during a holiday visit when I trusted everyone in the room. None of it was illegal. That was the problem. It was all clean. Clean like a locked door you don't realize you've walked through until someone else closes it. I called Judith on Monday morning. I think my family has been structuring me, I said. She didn't react. Tell me how. I explained, slowly, carefully. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. They didn't steal from you, she said. They positioned you. For what I asked. Convenience, she said. And control. That word again. Control. It was starting to feel less abstract and more architectural, like something built into the walls. What do I undo first? I asked. Judith smiled thinly. Everything that lets them speak for you. We made a list. Revoke powers. Separate accounts. Change beneficiaries. Create a paper trail that made my autonomy unmistakable. Do not announce this, she added. Silence gives you leverage. At work, I kept my routine steady. Same hours, same tone, same calm. No one there knew what was shifting under the surface, and I liked it that way. Control didn't have to be loud to be real. Rebecca called twice that week. I didn't answer. My mother left a voicemail. Your father is worried you're pulling away. Pulling away. As if I were a boat that had drifted without intention. I didn't call back. Instead, I filed paperwork. The first official step was revoking the power of attorney document. Judith filed it quietly, efficiently. No confrontation, just a registered letter sent to the address where I knew my parents would see it together. The receipt confirmation came 2 days later. That evening, Rebecca showed up at my townhouse unannounced. I saw her car before she knocked, parked too close to the curb like she had been in a hurry. I didn't open the door right away. I finished my tea, I washed the mug, then I opened it. She stood there with her arms crossed, face already set for persuasion. What are you doing? She asked, skipping hello. Good evening, I said. This is serious, she said. Dad got a notice. Legal paperwork. Yes, I said. You're making this adversarial, she said. It doesn't have to be. I stepped aside and let her in. Not because she deserved access, but because I wanted to hear how she framed it. She paced my living room like she owned it. Took in the furniture, the books, the framed photo from a hiking trip I had taken alone last year. You're acting like we're enemies, she said. No, I said, I'm acting like an adult. She stopped. You're destabilizing things. For whom, I asked. For the family, she said. For the company, for Mom. I nodded. Notice how none of those answers include me. Her jaw tightened. You've always had a chip on your shoulder. That's not true, I said. I just finally noticed the weight. She scoffed. You're being dramatic. I met her eyes. I'm being precise. She laughed sharp and humorless. You don't even want the business. Why do you care? That was the question she thought would end the conversation. I care, I said, because you assumed I wouldn't. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched. This is about money, she said finally. No, I said, this is about consent. She looked genuinely confused. I didn't agree to be managed, I continued. I didn't agree to have conditions placed on my adulthood. And I didn't agree to you speaking for me. Her voice softened. We're just trying to protect you. I smiled. You're trying to protect a version of me that stays useful. That landed. She left 10 minutes later without a hug, without a threat, without resolution, just a warning. You're going to regret this, she said at the door. I nodded. Maybe. After she left, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and let the quiet settle. Not relief, not triumph, just clarity. The next step was more complicated. There was a loan. I found it buried in a file from years ago labeled innocuously. A personal loan in my name, taken to support an expansion phase of the family business when I was 26. My father had explained it as a tax maneuver at the time. Temporary, he had said. You're just a name on paper. The balance was small now, almost gone. But the liability was real. Judith confirmed it. You were used as leverage. For what I asked, though, the answer was obvious. For their risk, she said. We paid it off in full the next day. No announcement, no drama, just a wire transfer and a confirmation email. That was the moment something shifted. Not emotionally, practically. They could no longer say they had supported me, or carried me, or invested in me. The ledger was clean. My father called that night, first time in weeks. You're making choices without consulting us, he said. Yes, I said. This affects everyone, he said. It affects me most, I replied. He exhaled slowly. You're isolating yourself. No, I said, I'm separating. There was a pause, a recalibration. We did what we thought was best, he said. I believe you, I said. That doesn't obligate me to accept it. He hung up without saying goodbye. I slept well again. Because for the first time I wasn't reacting. I was moving ahead of them. And they could feel it. Control doesn't disappear when you confront it. It adapts. The next move came quietly wrapped in concern and delivered through my mother. She called on a Tuesday evening, voice gentle, almost careful. Your father hasn't been sleeping, she said. He's worried about you. I stood at my kitchen counter watching the rain streak down the window. Worried about what exactly? That you're making decisions out of hurt, she said. That you're being influenced. By whom, I asked. There was a pause long enough to answer without words. That attorney, she said finally. Rebecca thinks she's putting ideas in your head. I smiled to myself. The pattern was familiar now. When they didn't like my agency, they reframed it as manipulation. I hired her, I said. She works for me. That's not how it feels to your father, my mother said. He feels shut out. I leaned against the counter. That's interesting, because I felt shut out long before this. Another pause. My mother's pauses were different from my father's. His were tactical. Hers were afraid. We only want peace, she said. I know, I said. But peace that requires my silence isn't peace. She sighed. Can you come over for dinner this weekend? Just the four of us. No paperwork, no fighting. I considered it. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted information. Family dinners had always been their preferred stage. I'll come, I said, but I'm not discussing legal matters. That's fine, she said quickly. Too quickly, of course. I arrived Saturday evening exactly on time. The house looked unchanged, but I noticed the details now. The way the front door opened inward, limiting space, the seating arrangement at the table, the chair they always gave me slightly farther from my father. Rebecca was already there. She smiled when she saw me, wide and brittle. Look at you, she said, all professional now. I returned the smile without comment. Dinner was quiet at first. My father spoke about supply chain issues, about rising costs, about how difficult it was to maintain standards in an unstable market. Rebecca nodded in all the right places. Daniel stayed silent, eyes down. I ate slowly, observed. Halfway through the meal, my father set his fork down. We need to talk about your future, he said. I looked up. I thought we agreed not to. This isn't legal, he said. It's practical. I waited. You're drifting, he continued. You've always been capable but unfocused. This independence phase, it's temporary. You'll see that eventually. Rebecca jumped in. We just want to make sure you're secure. Define secure, I said. My father gestured around the table. This, family, stability, and control, I added quietly. His eyes hardened. You keep using that word. Because it's accurate, I said. Rebecca leaned forward. You're reading everything as a threat. No, I said. I'm reading it as a system. My mother cleared her throat. Honey, you don't have to push so hard. I'm not pushing, I said. I'm standing. That was when my father said it, casually, almost kindly. If you keep going down this path, you may find yourself excluded. The word hung in the air. Excluded from what I asked. He hesitated just long enough to tell me everything. Certain considerations, certain protections. Rebecca watched me closely now. I'm already excluded, I said. You just didn't tell me until it was convenient. My father's voice sharpened. You're being ungrateful. There it was, the familiar accusation polished and ready. I paid off the loan, I said calmly. Rebecca stiffened. Daniel looked up for the first time. What loan, my mother asked. My father's face changed. Not anger, alarm. The personal one, I continued. In my name, for the company, it's cleared. Silence slammed down on the table. Rebecca turned to my father. You said that was handled. It was, he said quickly, mostly. Mostly, I repeated. My mother's hands trembled. Charles. He waved her off. It was temporary, a formality. You never told me, Rebecca said, her voice tight. You didn't need to know, he snapped. I sat back and watched the fracture spread. Not dramatic, just visible. This is why I needed autonomy, I said. Because even you don't tell each other the truth when it's inconvenient. My father stood. You're twisting things. No, I said, I'm naming them. He pointed at me. You think you're smarter than everyone in this room. I think I'm responsible for myself, I said. That's different. Rebecca stood too. You're tearing this family apart. I met her gaze. I didn't design the fault lines. My mother's voice broke. Please, can we stop? I pushed my chair back and stood. I think we should. My father's voice dropped cold and controlled. If you walk out now, don't expect things to be the same. I looked at him, really looked, at the man who equated love with leverage. They were never the same, I said. I just stopped pretending. I left without dessert. In the car, my phone buzzed, a message from Rebecca. You crossed a line tonight. I typed back one sentence. I finally saw it. I didn't hear from them for 3 weeks after that. In that silence, something else arrived. A certified letter. From the family company's legal department. It informed me that my role as a minor stakeholder, something I hadn't even known existed, was being dissolved as part of a restructuring initiative. A buyout offer was enclosed. Modest, clean, final. Judith read it and nodded. They're trying to close the loop, she said, make you disappear from the equation. And if I refuse, I asked. They'll escalate, she said. But you'll gain leverage. I looked at the number on the page. It wasn't insulting. It was strategic. Designed to look generous while undervaluing what I represented. What would you do, I asked. She smiled. I'd counter. And I'd prepare. For what? For the moment they realize you're not asking to be included anymore. I went home and opened a new folder on my computer. I titled it simply Separation, because this wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about reclaiming the ground beneath my feet. And I was done standing on theirs. The buyout offer sat on my desk for 4 days before I touched it again. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to understand what it represented. It wasn't about the money. It was about finality, about erasing a loose end in a system that preferred clean edges and predictable outcomes. I had become unpredictable. Judith and I met on Thursday morning. She had already annotated the document red ink marking places where language softened power into courtesy. They're offering you certainty, she said, in exchange for silence. And if I take it, I said, I disappear. From their narrative, she corrected, not from the consequences. I leaned back. What happens if I counter? They stall, she said. They test you. They apply pressure through emotional channels first. When that fails, they move to legal ones. I thought about my mother's trembling hands, Rebecca's tight smile, my father's controlled voice. I'm ready, I said. We drafted a counter-proposal that afternoon. It wasn't aggressive. It was precise. Full market valuation of my stake, acknowledgement of my prior financial exposure, and a clause preventing future misrepresentation of my involvement in company communications. You're asking them to admit you mattered, Judith said. I did, I said. We sent it. 2 hours later, my mother called. I let it ring. An hour after that, Rebecca emailed. This is unnecessary. You're complicating things for everyone. I replied once. I'm clarifying them. That night, I received a calendar invite, emergency family meeting, Saturday, their house. I declined. The response came within minutes. Your absence will be noted. I smiled at that. Noted by whom? The same people who had decided my life could be conditional. Saturday morning, I went to work instead, not my job, but myself. I met with a financial planner and set up accounts solely in my name. retirement, investments, a safety net that didn't require anyone else's approval. In the afternoon, Judith called. "They're rattled," she said. Because I countered, I asked. "Because you documented," she said. "They thought you were emotional. Emotional people fold." I stood at my window and watched the city move. Cars, people, lives happening without my family's permission. "What's next?" I asked. "They'll try to reframe you," she said, "as unstable, as unreasonable, as ungrateful." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel, my brother-in-law, the quiet one. "I didn't know how to talk to you before. I think you should know Rebecca is scared." Scared of what? I typed. "That you won't need us anymore." I stared at that sentence for a long time. The next escalation came disguised as concern for my well-being. My company's HR department called me in on Monday morning. Polite? Formal? "We've received an inquiry," the manager said, "regarding your emotional state." I blinked. "From whom?" "They didn't disclose," she said, "but it mentioned family stress and potential distraction." There it was. I didn't react, I didn't defend, I asked for documentation. 2 emails later, I had it. An anonymous message referencing family conflict, legal disputes, and concern about my capacity to handle sensitive projects. Rebecca didn't sign it. She didn't have to. I forwarded it to Judith. "They've crossed into defamation," she said calmly. Subtle, but actionable. "What do we do?" I asked. "We wait," she said, "and we prepare to respond cleanly." That afternoon, I received another letter from the company's legal department. The tone had changed, less courteous, more firm. They were withdrawing the initial buyout offer. My counterproposal, they said, demonstrated unwillingness to cooperate. Judith read it and smiled. "They blinked," she said. "What now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "you remind them why cooperation was in their best interest." She drafted a response citing my documented financial contributions, the personal loan I had cleared, and my potential claims as a stakeholder whose consent had not been properly secured. No threats, just facts. We sent it. That night my father called. His voice was tight, controlled. "You've made your point." "I haven't made anything," I said. I responded. "You're embarrassing us," he said. "No," I said. "You're uncomfortable." Silence crackled through the line. "This isn't how family behaves," he said finally. I took a breath. "This is how adults protect themselves." He hung up. The next morning, my HR manager emailed again. "Thank you for your transparency. The matter has been resolved. No further action needed." I closed my laptop and sat very still. They had tried to move me without touching me, and when that didn't work, they had backed off. Rebecca texted that afternoon. "You've turned this into a war." I typed slowly. "I didn't start it. I just stopped losing quietly." There was no reply. That evening, Judith called with an update. "They want to talk," she said, "new terms." When I asked, "Tomorrow," she said, "with their attorney, and this time they asked for you by name." I looked around my apartment. The space felt larger than it had months ago. "Good," I said. "I'll bring my own chair." I slept deeply that night, not because I felt victorious, but because I finally understood something important. When people benefit from your silence, they panic when you learn to speak in ink. And this time I wasn't raising my voice. I was signing my name. The conference room they chose told me everything before anyone spoke. Neutral glass walls, no family photos, no warmth. This was no longer a domestic dispute wrapped in sentiment. This was a transaction they could no longer control privately. Rebecca sat across from me, posture perfect, hands folded. My father took the seat beside her, shoulders squared like this was a board review. Their attorney, a man with a thin smile and a practiced calm, arranged his papers with deliberate care. Judith sat next to me, quiet, unreadable. No one offered coffee. We exchanged pleasantries that meant nothing. Then their attorney cleared his throat. "We'd like to resolve this efficiently," he said, "with minimal disruption." I nodded, so would I. He slid a new document across the table. Revised terms, better valuation, still incomplete. Rebecca spoke before anyone else could. "This doesn't have to damage relationships." I looked at her. "That depends on whether you think relationships survive on leverage." She stiffened. My father's jaw tightened. Judith spoke for the first time. "We reviewed your restructuring timeline. There are discrepancies." The attorney paused. "What discrepancies?" "Asset transfers," she said. "Internal loans, deferred liabilities." My father leaned forward. "Those are internal matters. Not when my client's name appears on the paper," Judith said calmly. Silence. This was the first time I saw it. Not anger, not authority, fear. The attorney adjusted his glasses. "We're willing to improve the offer." "Define improve," I said. He named a number. It was closer, still not accurate. "I'm not interested in the number alone," I said. "I'm interested in acknowledgement." Rebecca frowned. "Acknowledgement of what?" "That my exclusion was deliberate," I said. and that my contributions were material. My father exhaled sharply. This is unnecessary. No, I said, it's corrective. Judith slid a single page forward. A summary, clean, documented, dates, transfers, payments, the loan I had cleared, the way my credit had been used to stabilize their risk. The attorney read it carefully, too carefully. This changes the exposure, he said. Yes, Judith said, it does. My father spoke quietly. You didn't have to go this far. I met his eyes. You taught me to. That landed harder than anything else I could have said. The attorney closed the folder. We'll need time to revise. I'm not in a hurry, I said. I've waited years. Rebecca looked at me, then really looked. The polished certainty was gone. What replaced it wasn't guilt, it was calculation. You're willing to burn this down, she said. I shook my head. I'm willing to walk away from it. That was the difference. We ended the meeting without shaking hands. Outside, the sky was pale and flat, like it hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. I stood on the sidewalk and breathed until the tension drained out of my shoulders. Judith turned to me. They'll concede. When I asked, soon, she said. They can't afford not to. She was right. 2 days later, the new offer arrived. Full valuation, a written acknowledgement of my prior financial involvement, a clause preventing any representation of me as disengaged or dependent in future disclosures. And one more thing, a non-disparagement agreement. I read it twice. They don't want me to talk, I said. They don't want you to tell the story, Judith corrected. I signed. Not because I was silenced, but because I didn't need their audience anymore. The funds cleared the following week. The number sat in my account like something unreal. Not because it was large, but because it represented closure. I told no one in my family. I didn't need to. Rebecca called that night. You got what you wanted, she said. I got what was mine, I replied. You've changed, she said. Yes, I said. I stopped waiting. She was quiet for a moment. Dad hasn't taken this well. I didn't respond. He feels betrayed, she added. I thought about that word, how easily it traveled in one direction. I didn't betray him, I said. I exited a role I never agreed to play. She hung up without saying goodbye. That weekend, I packed up the last of the things I had stored at my parents' house. Childhood boxes, old photos, objects that held meaning only because someone else had decided they did. My mother hovered in the doorway while I worked. You didn't have to do it this way, she said softly. I did, I replied. She nodded, eyes wet. I hope you know we love you. I paused, looked at her. I know you do. I just know now what it costs. She didn't argue. As I carried the final box to my car, my father stood on the porch. He didn't come down. He didn't speak. I looked at him once, just once. Then I drove away. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened a bottle of wine and poured a single glass. I sat on the floor and let the quiet wrap around me. There was no triumph, no celebration, just space, the kind you don't realize you've been missing until it's finally yours. And for the first time since that Christmas brunch, I wasn't reacting to what my family had decided. I was deciding what came next. Space changes you if you stay in it long enough. The first few weeks after the settlement felt strangely empty. No calls, no carefully worded texts, no pressure disguised as concern. The silence wasn't hostile. It was cautious, like they were all waiting to see what I would do now that I wasn't tethered to them anymore. I didn't rush to fill it. Instead, I noticed how much of my life had been structured around anticipation. Anticipating my father's approval, my mother's disappointment, Rebecca's quiet comparisons. Without that constant low hum, my days felt longer, wider, less efficient, more honest. At work, the regional rollout wrapped earlier than expected. My supervisor called me into her office late one afternoon and closed the door. We're creating a new role, she said, strategic oversight, fewer emergencies, more long-term planning. I nodded. And you want me to take it? She smiled. We want you to shape it. It wasn't a promotion announcement. There were no congratulations emails, just a decision made because someone had noticed how I moved through chaos without flinching. I accepted. That night I went home and cooked a proper meal for the first time in months. Nothing elaborate, just something that required attention. Chopping vegetables, waiting, listening to the pan. Halfway through my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. This is Thomas Hale, a man said. I represent your grandmother's estate. My hand stilled. I wasn't aware there was an open matter, I said carefully. There wasn't, he replied, until recently. I sat down at the table. Go on. There was a supplemental trust, he said. Created several years ago. It was structured to activate under specific conditions. What conditions, I asked. A significant change in family governance, he said, and demonstrated financial independence by the beneficiary. I didn't speak. It names you, he continued. Sole beneficiary. The room felt suddenly very quiet. My grandmother passed away 5 years ago, I said. Yes, he said. She anticipated delays. I closed my eyes. He explained, slowly, methodically. My grandmother had never trusted my father's obsession with legacy. She had watched the way Rebecca was elevated and I was managed. She had set aside assets quietly, property shares, a modest but valuable investment portfolio. Nothing extravagant. Enough. She believed you would need leverage one day, he said. I laughed softly. She always did like preparation. She also left a letter, he said. Addressed to you. It's time delayed. I can send it or you can come in. I'll come in, I said. The office was small, warm, the kind of place where legal work felt human. Thomas handed me an envelope yellowed with age. I opened it carefully. My darling, if you're reading this, it means you finally stepped out of the shadow they tried to keep you in. I won't pretend this doesn't hurt. Families are complicated, but they are not entitled to your obedience. I watched you grow into yourself quietly. That's always been your strength. They may never applaud it, but that doesn't make it small. Use this not as revenge, but as protection. And remember, love that requires you to disappear is not love worth preserving. Love, Grandma. I folded the letter and held it to my chest longer than I meant to. The trust transfer was clean, independent, irrevocable. Judith reviewed it and smiled. She was thorough. I know, I said. We finalized the paperwork within weeks. No announcements, no family meetings, no confrontation. Rebecca found out anyway. She called late one night, voice tight with disbelief. Did you know about this? She demanded. Yes, I said. You hid it, she said. I inherited it, I corrected. That money should have been part of the family plan, she snapped. I thought about my grandmother's letter. It was. She scoffed. You're rewriting history. No, I said. I'm finally reading it. She hung up. 2 days later, my mother sent a message. Your father feels humiliated. He says everyone is talking. I stared at the screen, then typed one sentence. I didn't tell them. There was no reply. The thing about revenge is that it rarely looks like confrontation when it's real. It looks like inevitability, like consequences arriving without your help. I didn't need to expose them. The structure they built had done that on its own. Weeks passed, then months. I moved my savings into the new trust, bought a small piece of property near the coast. Not a statement, a refuge. On the day the keys were handed to me, I stood alone in the empty house and listened to the ocean in the distance. No one to impress, no one to appease, just space. And in that space, something settled that had been restless for years. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I had inherited something far more valuable than money. I had inherited certainty, and I suspected my family felt it too. The story they told about me began to travel before I did. It always happens that way. When control slips, narrative becomes the last line of defense. I heard it first from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She called under the excuse of catching up, then circled carefully before landing the question she really wanted answered. Are you okay? She asked. I heard things got intense. Define intense, I said. There was a pause. Rebecca said you've been unstable. That lawyers got involved because you're having some kind of breakdown. I thanked her for checking in and ended the call politely. Then I sat very still. They weren't attacking me directly. They were softening the ground around me, making sure that if I spoke, my words would already sound suspicious. I didn't correct anyone, not yet. Instead, I documented every forwarded message, every half-concerned email, every version of the story that arrived wrapped in sympathy and ended in doubt. I didn't argue. I didn't clarify. I let people talk. Silence makes liars careless. The next escalation came wrapped in celebration. Rebecca was getting remarried. Daniel had moved out quietly months earlier, the separation handled with the same discretion my family applied to everything inconvenient. The new fiancé was a regional developer, older, well-connected. A good match, my mother said, in the way she used that phrase when something solved multiple problems at once. The invitation arrived in my mailbox with a heavy textured envelope. I wasn't invited to the ceremony, only the reception. I laughed when I saw it, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. They didn't want my absence noticed in the photographs. They just didn't want me present for the vows, for the symbolism. A separate card was included. We hope you understand the need for simplicity. Simplicity, it turned out, was a curated guest list. I RSVP'd yes. Judith raised an eyebrow when I told her. Are you sure? Yes, I said. I don't intend to make a scene. Then what do you intend? She asked. To be accurate, I said. The wedding took place at a renovated vineyard outside the city. White chairs, pale flowers, everything designed to photograph as serene. I arrived alone on time, dressed plainly. No statement, no provocation. My mother hugged me too tightly. My father nodded once. Rebecca avoided my eyes. The reception was full of people who knew me only as an outline. The difficult sister, the one who caused stress, the cautionary tale told quietly near the bar. I let them believe it. Halfway through dinner, the developer fiancé made a toast. He spoke about family values, about legacy, about building something that lasts. I noticed how often that word followed Rebecca through her life like a shadow. After dessert, while people drifted toward the dance floor, I excused myself and stepped outside. The air was cool, clean, the kind that clears your head. That was when I saw him. My grandmother's former financial advisor, older now, slower, standing near the edge of the patio with a glass of wine he wasn't drinking. He smiled when he recognized me. I wondered if you'd come, he said. I wondered if you'd be here, I replied. We spoke quietly. About the vineyard, about time, about my grandmother's foresight. I always admired her clarity, he said. She didn't confuse affection with obligation. I nodded. She saved me from that. He glanced toward the reception hall where my family moved like a single unit. They don't know yet, do they? No, I said, and they don't need to. He smiled. You learn at her patience. When I returned inside, Rebecca intercepted me near the bar. You look well, she said. Her tone suggested this was inconvenient. So do you, I replied. She hesitated. I hope this hasn't been awkward. No, I said. It's been educational. Her eyes narrowed. About what? About how much effort goes into pretending, I said. She flushed. You always have to frame things like an accusation. No, I said, just an observation. She lowered her voice. People are watching. I know, I said. That was when I handed her the envelope. She frowned. What's this? Something I wanted to give you privately, I said. She opened it, scanned the contents, then looked up sharply. A notarized statement. Clean, factual. A clarification of my financial independence, my separation from family business interests, and a request that my name no longer be used in any internal or external communications, implying instability or dependency. What is this? She hissed. A boundary, I said. You're doing this here, she asked. I'm doing this correctly, I said. You can sign now or acknowledge receipt later. Her fiancé appeared at her side confused. Everything okay? Yes, she said too quickly, just family things. He nodded and stepped away. Rebecca looked at me with something close to panic. You're humiliating me. I shook my head. I'm making sure there's no confusion. She signed. Her hand shook. I left 10 minutes later. Quietly. No goodbyes. No confrontation. The next morning, my phone was full of messages. My mother, my father, aunts, uncles. Why would you do this now? Couldn't you let her have her day? You've always been difficult. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the signed document to Judith and archived the thread. 2 weeks later, a retraction circulated. Subtle, polite, clarifying. The story about my instability softened into a misunderstanding. The whispers lost their edge. People stopped asking if I was okay. They started asking how I was doing. That shift told me everything. Revenge doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives with corrected records, steady posture, and the quiet relief of knowing the story can no longer be told without you. And my family was beginning to understand something they had never planned for. I was no longer available for their version of events. Distance reveals what proximity hides. After the wedding, something in my family recalibrated. Not reconciliation, not remorse, something more cautious. They stopped assuming access. My father didn't call. My mother sent shorter messages, careful not to ask questions that required answers she didn't want. Rebecca went quiet altogether, which I recognized as strategy, not surrender. I didn't chase the silence. I let it do its work. Spring came early that year. The coast house filled with light, and the sound of the ocean softened my thoughts in ways the city never had. I spent weekends there alone, learning the rhythms of a place that didn't know my last name. One morning, while reviewing documents at the kitchen table, Judith called. They filed, she said. Who I asked, though I already suspected. The company, she said. They're petitioning to amend historical records. To do what I asked. Reduce your documented involvement, she said. They want to reclassify certain transactions as gifts. I closed my eyes, so I looked dependent. Exactly, she said. It supports their narrative retroactively. I felt something cold settle in my chest, not fear, annoyance. What's our response? I asked. We object, she said, and we escalate. That was the word, escalate. It had been waiting patiently in the corner of this story. Within a week, we filed a formal challenge. Not emotional, not vindictive, just thorough. We attached bank records, correspondence meeting notes, and sworn statements from third parties who had witnessed my role during the years they now wanted to rewrite. The filing didn't accuse, it corrected. That mattered. My father called 2 days later. You didn't need to involve the courts, he said. You involved them first, I replied. This will be public, he said. Do you understand what that means? Yes, I said. It means the truth won't be private anymore. Silence. You're forcing our hand, he said. I didn't force anything I said, I responded. His voice lowered. You're risking the company. I thought about that. About how often risk had been assigned downward in our family. The company shouldn't depend on pretending I was irrelevant. He exhaled sharply. You always had to complicate things. No, I said. You just preferred when I stayed convenient. He hung up. The hearing was scheduled for early summer. In the weeks leading up to it, I noticed something else shifting. People from the company began reaching out quietly. Former managers, accountants, an HR director who had retired years earlier. They didn't offer loyalty, they offered facts. Your father insisted your signature was procedural. Rebecca approved the transfers knowing you were covering gaps. We assumed you were being compensated privately. Each conversation added another layer of clarity. Not betrayal, not conspiracy, just a system that worked because no one questioned it. Until someone did. The day of the hearing, I wore a simple navy dress and flat shoes. No armor, no softness, just myself. Rebecca avoided looking at me in the hallway. My father looked older than I remembered. Smaller, less certain. Their attorney argued calmly, presented the reclassification as administrative cleanup, historical adjustment. Judith stood and dismantled it piece by piece. Dates, numbers, emails, intent. She didn't accuse my family of malice. She framed them as mistaken, incomplete, in need of correction. The judge listened carefully, asked questions, took notes. When it was over, the ruling was brief. Objection sustained. Records to remain unchanged. Petitioner responsible for costs. I didn't react. Rebecca closed her eyes. My father stared straight ahead. Outside the courthouse, my mother approached me slowly. I don't understand why you keep pushing, she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. I'm not pushing, I said. I'm holding my ground. She nodded faintly. You've always been stubborn. I smiled. So I've been told. That night alone at the coast house, I sat on the floor with the windows open and let the sound of the waves fill the room. The tension I'd been carrying for months loosened its grip. This wasn't victory, it was resolution. But resolution has consequences. 2 days later, an email circulated among extended family. A message from my father. It spoke of betrayal, of disappointment, of a daughter who had chosen litigation over loyalty. It didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. I read it once, then forwarded it to Judith. Do nothing, she replied. And for the first time, that instruction felt like power, not restraint. The next message came from Rebecca late at night. I never thought you'd go this far. I typed deleted, typed again. I didn't go far, I went free. I turned off my phone. Because the truth had finally done what it always does when it's allowed to stand. It stopped needing my defense. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments. A missed holiday invitation. A friend's careful pause before asking how my parents were doing. A cousin's sudden enthusiasm to reconnect that felt more like reconnaissance than affection. I let it happen. When people lose control, they look for witnesses. I refused to be one. By late summer, the company announced a leadership reshuffle. The language was neutral, but the subtext was clear. Rebecca had stepped back from day-to-day operations. Daniel's name disappeared from the website. My father took on an advisory role that sounded ceremonial even to him. The structure they had guarded so tightly was loosening. I found out the same way everyone else did. A press release forwarded by someone who assumed I'd want to know. I didn't reply. The coast house became my anchor. I worked remotely part of the week, taking calls with the ocean behind me. The sound softened even the hardest conversations. One afternoon, as I was walking along the beach, my phone rang. It was my mother. I considered not answering. Then I did. He's not well, she said without preamble. I stopped walking. What does that mean? Stress, she said. Blood pressure. The doctor says he needs to rest. I listened to the waves crash and pull back. I'm sorry to hear that. There was a long pause. He feels like he's lost everything. I thought about the trust, the company, the way he measured worth. I didn't take his health, I said, or his choices. I know, she said. Her voice was thin, but he doesn't. I closed my eyes. What are you asking me? She hesitated. Could you come see him? I pictured the house on the hill, the dining table, the careful seating. I'm willing to talk, I said. Not to fix, not to apologize, to talk. That would mean a lot, she said. I'll come next week, I said. The house felt smaller when I arrived, or maybe I was bigger. My father sat in the living room thinner, his hands resting on his knees. He looked up when I entered. For a moment, his face softened with something like relief. Then it hardened again. You didn't have to come, he said. I wanted to, I replied. We sat across from each other in silence. You humiliated me, he said finally. I told the truth, I said. He shook his head. You turned this into a spectacle. No, I said. I refused to be invisible. He looked away. You could have handled it privately. I tried, I said. You didn't listen. My mother hovered near the doorway, unsure whether to stay. I gave you everything, he said. I met his eyes. You gave me conditions. His jaw tightened. That's how families work. No, I said. That's how control works. He exhaled sharply. You think you're better than us now. I shook my head. I think I'm equal. That landed differently. The conversation didn't end in understanding. It ended in exhaustion. He was tired. I was done explaining. Before I left, my mother pressed a small box into my hands. Old photographs, letters, things she said she thought I'd want. I'm proud of you, she whispered as if it were a secret. I hugged her, carefully. Outside, the air felt lighter. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a journalist. I'm writing a piece on family-owned businesses and succession conflicts, she said. Your name came up. I declined, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need a platform. Then something unexpected happened. Rebecca reached out, not with accusation, not with demand, with an invitation. Coffee, neutral ground. I considered it for a full day before agreeing. We met at a quiet cafe near the river. She looked tired, less polished, more real. I didn't know how bad things were, she said after we ordered. That makes 2 of us, I replied. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. I thought if I did everything right, Dad would finally relax. And did he? I asked. She shook her head. No. We sat with that. I was angry at you, she said, because you refused to play along. I wasn't trying to make your life harder, I said. I was trying to make mine livable. She nodded slowly. I see that now. It wasn't an apology, but it was close. When we parted, nothing was fixed, but something had shifted. That night back at the coast house, I stood at the window and watched the moon pull the tide in and out. The power struggle was over. What remained was something quieter. Choice. And for the first time, every option in front of me felt like it belonged to me alone. I used to think the hardest part would be the confrontation. I was wrong. The hardest part was what came after when there was nothing left to fight and no role left to perform. Autumn settled in gently that year. Leaves gathered along the edges of sidewalks like they were waiting for instructions. The coast house smelled faintly of salt and old wood, and I learned the sound of it at night, the way it creaked when the temperature dropped. I slept better there than anywhere else I had ever lived. Work slowed into a steady rhythm. The new role fit me in a way I hadn't expected. Fewer emergencies, more judgment calls. I was trusted to see patterns before they became problems. No one hovered. No one second-guessed. One afternoon, my supervisor said something offhand that stayed with me. You don't flinch, she said, even when the room does. I smiled and changed the subject, but inside I understood why. I had already lived through rooms that turned cold without warning. This was easy by comparison. The quiet with my family continued uneven but stable. My mother sent photos occasionally. A new plant on the windowsill. A finished puzzle on the dining table. Small proofs of life. She didn't ask when I was coming back. I didn't offer. My father didn't contact me at all. I heard about him through others. He had resigned completely from the company, sold his remaining advisory shares. He spent more time at home now, less time correcting people who no longer asked his opinion. The man who had built his identity on being needed was learning what happened when that need dissolved. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. Just a distant sadness, like watching a storm pass through a town you no longer lived in. Rebecca and I exchanged messages occasionally, short, careful. She told me she was considering moving, starting something smaller, something that didn't require constant performance. I don't know who I am without the pressure, she wrote once. I stared at that sentence longer than I expected to. Neither did I at first. That realization came one morning in November. I was standing in the kitchen watching coffee drip into the pot when it hit me that there was nothing urgent waiting for me. No family decision looming. No narrative to defend. No meeting where I needed to prove my worth. Just time. It was unsettling. I had built myself around endurance, around adaptation, around staying calm when other people panicked. Without that, there was a hollow space I didn't know how to fill. So I did something unfamiliar. I stopped optimizing. I took a full week off work and didn't plan anything. I walked. I read. I cooked food that took hours instead of minutes. I let days pass without assigning them value. On the third evening, I sat on the floor with old photographs spread around me, the box my mother had given me. There I was at 8, missing 2 front teeth, holding a ribbon I'd won at a science fair. My father stood just out of frame, his hand visible at my shoulder, not quite resting there. Another photo. Me at 16 holding a part-time job certificate, Rebecca beside me in a dress she hated smiling anyway. I noticed something I had never allowed myself to notice before. I had always been present, always contributing, always steady. I just hadn't been celebrated. That wasn't a flaw in me. It was a choice others had made. And choices could be undone. The next message from my father came in late November. It was a letter, handwritten, brief. I don't know how to talk to you without feeling like I'm losing something. I don't know how to apologize without admitting I was wrong. I'm not there yet. I folded it carefully and set it aside. It wasn't enough, but it was honest. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of respect for the boundary I had built. If he wanted reconciliation, it couldn't be on my schedule. Or my silence. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it at the Coast House with friends I had chosen, not inherited. The table was crowded. The conversation was messy. No one tried to control the story. It felt real. On the drive back to the city, I realized something else. The revenge everyone expects in stories like this isn't loud. It doesn't end with someone groveling or exposed. The real revenge is that you no longer need them to understand what they did. You understand it yourself. By December, the tension had fully drained out of my body. Not gone, just quiet. I had reclaimed my name, my time, my choices. There was nothing left to prove. And that more than anything felt like the end of something old and the beginning of something honest. I knew the final chapter wouldn't be about them at all. It would be about what I chose next. The year turned without ceremony. No countdown. No resolution. Just a morning that arrived the way mornings do. Pale light sliding across the floor, the ocean steady in the distance, my phone quiet on the counter. I used to think endings needed witnesses, apologies, recognition. A moment where everyone finally agreed on what had happened. I don't anymore. What changed my life wasn't a confrontation or a court ruling or even the money. It was the moment I understood that love, the kind I had been taught to earn, was actually a system of permissions. Who got to speak? Who got to decide? Who was allowed to leave without being punished for it? Once I saw that I couldn't unsee it, in January, I finalized the last piece of separation. A simple legal document dissolving any remaining informal obligations tied to my family's estate planning. No drama, no announcement. Just my signature, a notary stamp, and a copy filed away where it could do its quiet work. When Judith handed it back to me, she said, "This closes the loop." I nodded. It opened something else. I didn't tell my family. I didn't need to. Separation doesn't require an audience. Work continued. I shaped my role into something sustainable, something that didn't reward burnout or self-erasure. I delegated more. I trusted people. I stopped being indispensable on purpose. At the Coast House, I planted a small garden in the back where the soil was stubborn and sandy. I learned which plants could survive salt wind and which ones couldn't. The ones that lasted were the ones that bent without breaking. That felt like a lesson I could finally accept. My mother sent a message in February. Just a photo of the backyard at the old house, snow melting into mud. No question attached. I replied with a photo of the ocean at dusk. We didn't say anything else. Rebecca wrote once more in March, a longer message this time. I'm stepping away from what I thought I was supposed to want. I don't know where it leads. I just know I'm tired. I read it twice. Then I wrote back. Rest is not failure, it's information. She sent a single heart, nothing more. My father never followed up after his letter. I don't know if he expected me to bridge the distance or if he was simply acknowledging it. Either way, I let it stand. That was the final boundary. Not silence as punishment, silence as choice. Spring came. The coast softened. The air warmed. One morning, I walked along the beach and realized I was no longer rehearsing conversations in my head. No explanations, no defenses, no imaginary arguments. The space where that noise used to live was calm. That was how I knew I was done. If you're looking for the revenge in this story, here it is. I didn't destroy them. I didn't expose them. I didn't make them apologize. I stopped participating in a system that required my compliance to function. I took my name out of their mouths, my money out of their plans, my silence out of their control. I chose legality over loyalty, clarity over comfort, self-respect over being the good one. And in doing so, I took back the one thing they had quietly assumed would always belong to them: my future. If you're listening to this and wondering whether it's too late to draw a line, to step back, to choose yourself, without asking permission, hear this clearly. The moment you stop trying to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you, everything changes. You don't need to win. You don't need to be right. You don't need closure wrapped in an apology. You need boundaries. You need dignity. You need the courage to stand where you are seen, even if that place is alone at first. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to stay where you are diminished. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived a version of it in your own family, your own work, your own life, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what choosing yourself looked like for you. And if you want more stories like this, stories about quiet justice, earned freedom, and the kind of strength that doesn't need permission, you know what to do. Because the real ending isn't walking away. It's finally standing on ground that belongs to you.